Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stronger with Time. I'm your host, Tony Battaji. In today's conversation, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Mikki Williden. Mikki is a PhD-level certified nutritionist who's been in private practice for over 20 years. She's the host of the fantastic podcast called Mikkipedia, which covers topics of nutrition, longevity, fitness, and health. And she's got a great program called Mondays Matter, which helps people lose weight using scientifically based principles. In addition to working with a wide range of individuals in the general public, Mikki has also worked with world-class athletes and celebrities. In today's conversation, we talked about nutrition for general health and aging well for females. We looked at the role of nutrition in optimizing training and recovery for females who employ both resistance training and endurance exercise. Finally, we discussed nutrition around optimizing body fat loss and body composition. In there, we also discussed the time restriction of food consumption, pre-bed protein, exercise in the context of meal timing, and much more usable, practical information. This is a space where either crazy fads get a lot of attention or there's purely scientific pushback against those fads. Mikki is someone who really understands the science, but who works full-time with real human beings and can understand the constraints of real-life demands and challenges. In fact, she's the nutritionist that I use for my family members and my clients. So without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Mikki Williden. All right, Mikki, welcome.
Tony, fabulous to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. Been enjoying it, by the way. I love the title, Stronger by Time. It's really good.
Thank you. And it's great to be on the other side of the microphone. You have a podcast that I have listened to for years. How many years has it been going for?
So Mikkipedia has been going since 2021, I'm going to say. Sort of we were in the thick of a lockdown. So it was either 2020, I think it was 2021. And like you probably, Tony, I spent years listening to podcasts. Like I feel like I was an early adopter amongst the people around me. And then of course I had fitter radio podcasts with my mate Bevan. And then when I got the opportunity to do my own, when I could sort of expand and talk more about the things that I really love talking about, health, wellness, nutrition, endurance, and things like that, I jumped at the chance.
Yours is one of the podcasts I subscribe to and listen to regularly. And I think that's because we're in a similar age group, we see similar clients. And I have been sending you clients and family members for years and years before we even met.
Yes.
But I was thinking how it came about, but I was doing a research project in glucose control and using CGMs. And for the literature review, I needed a whole bunch of people who understood this technology. And my co-author said, why don't you speak to the New Zealand group at AUT because they're all across it. So one of your friends, Karen, was on the emails that went round, and then your name got thrown into it. And then I saw you on Twitter or something like that.
Yes.
And I thought, we really see the world in a very similar way. And that's when I trusted you enough to send a family member and my client. So you deal with a lot of the people very close to me.
Oh, I really value that, Tony. Thank you. And it is so, feels like such a small world when you put it like that. Like this, and this is what I love about the internet and being online. And I think in social media is another example where it absolutely gets a bad rap, but actually it's brought quite a few people of similar, I guess, not thoughts and beliefs around nutrition and health and stuff. It's brought people like that all together, which I really like as well.
It does, and it also does the opposite. It knocks us out of our echo chamber, and we tend to gravitate to people that we see the world the same way. But we can also discuss where we disagree or why we disagree. And you and I, and you've hooked up me with people that I've had some disagreements with, and it sharpens your own perspectives, and we either review or expand or something because we can talk more with people around the world. So it has brought a really great aspect as well.
And it's such a good point, actually. I was listening to something the other day, and they were talking about how if you really want to understand a topic, you should ask, and you hear two people have very different viewpoints, but then you ask each of those individuals what the good points of the alternative point of view, to see whether, because that really allows you an opportunity to see how much they actually understand what the other person is sort of talking about. Because you're right, it can absolutely be an echo chamber, which ideally you'd want to avoid. But to your point, it's really great to get different perspectives and different points of view.
Yeah, I think in our friendship circles, you gravitate to people who you like and share the same viewpoint and perspective on things. But when it comes to work, that can be a real blind spot, that you always think it should be done the same way. And we're often talking about the role of carbohydrate in the diet for health or in for performance, but that's probably been the largest area that both you and I have reviewed the training we got classically at university and been open to a different perspective. But I can remember in the 90s, university, being very confident in my viewpoint. And I had a friend's wife say, I want to do an Atkins diet. Oh no, this is the worst thing you could ever do. I was very, very cautious that they should really strongly reconsider that viewpoint. And now 20 years on, these are kinds of diets we would recommend in the right context, in the right person.
Yeah, you're so right. And in fact, I remember it almost feeling a bit like a dirty secret at a sports nutrition conference one year, when we were hearing someone present on the conventional sports nutrition guidelines, and me and a bunch of others. And this was well before we even got into the sort of research space of looking at low carbohydrate metabolic flexibility and things like that when I had my time at AUT University. This was well before that. And after the presentation, it was almost in whispers that we would be like, God, if I ever try and put my athletes on like 8 grams of carbs per kg body weight for them doing a couple of hours exercise, they just gain weight. And there's no room in the diet for all of the other foods that they actually need. Like, so you had like what you were taught at university and this is what it is. But then actually what you did in practice, because you figured out what actually worked. And this, I think, is a really important point for anyone who is interested in following someone and thinking about their point of view. Think about where that person sits. Like, if they are in a position where they understand research, they might even do it themselves, but they also work with an individual. And I think those two things are sort of critical to being able to translate that science into information people are actually find useful.
And that's the heart of what I want to discuss with you today, is how do you work with individuals? Because we've got guidelines and we've got textbooks and we've got recommendations, and virtually everyone that we work with has heard the phrase, this is the best ... This is the best diet for performance, weight loss, health. This is the best foods you should eat. And probably the world of nutrition and exercise, which is the world I live in, have the most misinformation, because people really want to know those answers or want a fast fix. And I want to involve our discussion around 3 topics, but basically around health span, about performance and training, and then about body composition. So let's start with nutrition for health. And I realize this is a topic that you cannot escape, because when people find out you're a nutritionist, that's all they want. They want to corner you and ask everything about nutrition. So let me maybe start with something that you wouldn't be asked. And that is, for me as a coach, when working with a client or a new client, I would do a battery of tests. I would look at their flexibility and their strength balance. And that really gives me the information which I will use to write a program. Do you have assessments that you use for nutrition? How do you find out where someone's at, other than this is the goal that they have?
Yeah, great question. And I think of a few different things, Tony. So I think first and foremost, I look at nutrient status, and you can determine nutrient status via a couple of ways. And I think, of course, one of the best ways is to actually get them to do a detailed food diary to sort of assess what's going in, the variety of foods, are they getting their micronutrients, what their macronutrients sort of look like. People often talk only about macronutrients, but the micronutrients are so important, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, fiber, things like that, for people who tolerate fiber. So I look at their nutrient status from an intake perspective, but then I also really want to understand, is their body utilizing these nutrients, and what's the nutrient status there? And so in addition to looking at metabolic markers like cholesterol, blood sugar, maybe insulin, and like liver enzymes, kidney function, I also want to know about thyroid function, B12, folate, vitamin D, zinc, and iron panel and ferritin, and also any markers of inflammation. So the reality is that these don't give us a full picture, but it does give you some insights into some of that, I guess, how their body, if their body's got the nutrients on board that they need. So that's sort of from a blood biomarker perspective. But then importantly, I want to know how the individual is feeling. Like a lot of people, particularly at our age, obviously they're coming to us for sort of hormonal issues, perimenopause, menopause. I get a lot of athletes in the endurance space as well. But I have noticed the conversation shift a little bit from just being about body composition to being about energy and actually feeling the way they used to. So I want to know about their sleep. I want to know about their alcohol intake, their coffee intake, their obviously their diet, as I mentioned, but what about timing of the food? Things like that. So those things are really important. Their hunger levels, cravings. So there's a sort of a full sort of, a subjective measures or markers, how they feel, but also these other nutrient markers. And of course, weight, blood pressure, and height. Of course, knowing the limitations around just weight itself. Waist circumference is another thing I'm interested in.
So you've got a lot of information at your disposal, but if you're looking at how someone's feeling and their blood markers, and you've looked at their nutritional status, do anything jump out at you in terms of, oh, I see that all the time, whether it's a vitamin D deficiency? Do you ever see frank deficiencies? You can't go to a supermarket and walk down the aisle and have whole aisles of just vitamins and minerals. And I'm sure there's two types of people: those who look at that and think, oh, I probably need all of them, and put them all in the basket, versus those who go, what a waste of money, you're going to pee it all out.
Yes.
What do you see? You've worked with enough females now that things jump out. In terms of strength, I could shut my eyes and have 100 females, and I could probably pick 3 or 4 things that I know almost every female will have in terms of the strength and balance.
Yeah.
Do you ever see that in terms of micronutrients, or is it mainly just big picture, just not enough protein, not enough fiber? What do you see?
Yeah, so there absolutely are patterns and things which I see quite often, particularly in this age group, not just this age group, but in this age group. So one would be iron. Iron is often low. And when I say low, like think about the reference range that you get when you get your iron or your nutrient marker measured through a laboratory. That's really wide for a lot of the markers. Some of them are standards from the WHO. Some of them are derived from that particular laboratory. So the average of everyone that's gone in to get a blood test, if you fall within a range of those sort of parameters, then you're considered normal. But oftentimes that doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal. And so people will go and they'll, for example, get their ferritin measured and it'll come in at like 22. Whereas I know there is research, I've seen research to show that a ferritin above 50 is required for good cognitive function, and maybe even a ferritin upwards of 100. And I can't tell you the reference off the top of my head, but with regards to maybe hair and hair quality. But point being, you'll be told that you are normal, but you're not necessarily optimal. And in fact, iron is a really common one, particularly because I see a lot of women who are health conscious. And a lot of the public health messaging around red meat has been to reduce the intake of red meat over the years. And so this is something which health conscious people do, but they're not necessarily the ones that benefit from those messages. And I've got to say, a lot of women my age sort of grew up thinking that red meat was fattening, and so it was one of the things to go when you tried to diet. But B12 is another one I see low, and to your point of frank deficiency, I believe that often the sort of lower end of the reference range for B12 might start at 110, and I've seen people around 110. Yet hasn't been acted upon by the person they've gone to see. That's not all doctors, of course, but just in these instances. Or they're sort of hanging around the low 200s. Of course, vitamin D is a big one, particularly here in New Zealand and potentially in Australia as well. In winter, you just don't get those UVB rays to synthesize vitamin D in the sun. So people need to supplement, but there's regulation as to how much vitamin D can be sold in a supplement, which doesn't often cover for deficiencies. Yeah, so those would probably be some. Thyroid is another one. A lot of the ones that I've just mentioned, they actually play a role in thyroid function, as does selenium, which we're low in New Zealand soil. Yeah, so these are typical patterns.
When I consider the clients who we're interested in around perimenopause and postmenopause, it's often really instructive for me to remember the legacy that the public, the females, have been given through public health guidelines of avoid sodium and salt, avoid red meat, avoid saturated fat in all foods, go low fat.
Yeah.
And I will have female clients who are in their 60s who will feel like it's a confessional and say, I had some red meat last night. I say, oh, right, you just last night. It's like, yeah, it was a bit naughty of me. And how do you feel? Oh, I feel good, actually. And then you try and give a lecture that public information has changed and science has moved since the 1970s, but it's so embedded in the psyche of the females who are perimenopause, postmenopause, that this is where they came from. So there's little surprise why we see an iron or a B12 deficiency, because these foods are considered sometimes foods.
100%. And eggs, gosh, like the idea that an egg is bad for you, that's been thrown out in public health messaging for the last 20 years, yet I still have clients who believe that to have an egg is considered a treat. Like it just takes time. Like I heard someone say on a podcast once that public health messaging changes one funeral at a time. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and after 20 years in this, now I sort of believe it, actually.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that has to do with a lot of areas in science where people strongly hold to an opinion.
Yeah.
And it's not until that they're at retirement age that the next generation comes in and ushers in a more up-to-date. And we see this all the time where it's kind of what you learn at university is being expounded to their patients. Say, well, hang on, this has been studied and advancements have been gained in these particular fields.
Yeah.
One area that I see, in addition to, say, low protein or low iron and some of the vitamin deficiencies, is just low energy. I can't tell you how many perimenopause and postmenopausal females have been on a diet their entire lives. And add exercise and add lack of sleep and a lot of work, that you just see these syndromes of being in energy deficit. Is this your population group as well?
Certainly it's a subsection of them. And the alternate, or a similar but different avatar, if you like, is the woman who feels like they've been on a diet their entire lives, but in fact might spend, say, 3 or 4 days of the week being on a diet, and then 3 or 4 days of the week not being on it. So because of this restrictive mindset, they jump back on the bandwagon on a Monday, only to crash and burn on a Thursday because they're completely under eating, and then they underestimate the calories going in on those days. So I definitely see that, albeit to your point, there is, of course, a population of women who do have real sort of metabolic adaptations. And I think there'll be an element of metabolic adaptation in the other group that we're talking about, that I've just mentioned. But I do probably see more of the latter, to be honest, Tony.
I see that too. And I'd probably put them in the same category of low energy Monday to Friday and then not on the weekend.
Yeah.
But I can remember many years thinking that everyone's metabolisms must be running very low. And I've certainly seen it, but we use indirect calorimetry to measure it when we think that it exists. And in some, where I have certainly seen it suppressed, are with people who routinely do water-only fasting for many days at a time, 7, 10, 14 days. Even when their weight's stable, they tend to be running less than what DEXA formulas have them.
Yeah.
But for most other people, it is exactly as you describe it. It's low energy certain days of the week, and then on the weekend, and they'll say, I cannot lose weight. And then you ask what they're eating, and it looks on paper, Monday to Friday, it's way under. It's 1,000 calories, it's 1,200. But yet they're either gaining weight or not losing weight. And so you either arrive at two conclusions. One, their metabolic rate is running low, we can measure it, or, speaks to your point, on certain days of the week they forget the alcohol, the drinking, and so forth. If this is such a common characteristic, how do you go about pointing it out to bring awareness and then trying to solve it?
Yeah, it's a great question because, of course, the other thing to consider is that the people who feel like they are on a diet their entire lives really truly believe that they are. And the effort that goes into their thinking about food and exercise is exhausting. And to that point, then it's actually better to sort of take some time out. But anyway, I think one of the things, Tony, is because there are so many different messages out there around nutrition, is that people try and problem solve without doing due diligence as to figure out what the problem is in the first place. So if I'm on social media and I'm scrolling and I hear someone say, oh, the reason you're lacking in energy is X, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's got to be it. And in fact, they haven't actually tracked their diet. And even by way of keeping a food journal and writing down what they eat, not necessarily even in an app, to actually really understand what the problem is. Because you've got to do that due diligence first. You've got to sit down and sort of go, okay, if I'm feeling like rubbish and I feel like I'm dieting all the time, but I do know I have a few wines in the weekend, but I don't think it's that bad. Actually, I want to sit down for 7 to 10 days and really understand what's actually going in. And when you bring that awareness, that actually is a real game changer for people, because sometimes it is that they're on 1,000 calories during the week, but sometimes they're not measuring their cooking oil and they're not measuring the handful of nuts, or they're putting a teaspoon of peanut butter in their breakfast and 2 in their mouths. So I think that is one of the first things. And I look at it and I just always sort of position it as this is a real opportunity for us to really understand why you're experiencing this weight loss resistance, if it's real. And if it isn't real, how fabulous, because there'll be things that we can change that'll allow you to see progress. And that's all people want, I think.
Right. And I'm in a lucky position because when it is complex, I just send them to you. Sometimes I've had some very easy ones where there was weight loss resistance, and we just looked at the green smoothie in the morning because they were eating quote unquote clean and healthy, and they just had a smoothie for breakfast. But the smoothie had 900 calories because they had added macadamia butter and some coconut something. And they just didn't realize. They just thought healthy fats and just put it in. And then when we actually measured it, it was 900 calories. Yeah. That was consumed every single day.
And often actually when people feel like they're doing everything right and not losing weight, I mean, often it is a calorie issue. And I mean, how great. Now you know it. Now you can fix it. And I think that's, whereas I don't know. Yeah, that's what I see too.
How important is blood sugar regulation for your clientele?
Hugely important. Hugely. And this is in fact one of my, I guess, my things around nutrition is that's what I'm aiming for with almost everyone. I don't agree with everything that Peter Attia says, because I mean, you don't agree with everything anyone says, but he's someone I listen to, and he's a firm believer of blood sugar balance as being sort of like the underlying thing to optimize health. And I really think it plays a huge role, particularly in women perimenopause age.
And why do you think that is the case?
So, one thing with blood sugar regulation is that it changes how your body responds to the foods that you sort of take in. It changes your metabolic markers in terms of markers of inflammation. I mean, it's two-way, if you like. Inflammation changes how your body responds to insulin, yet of course high insulin can impact on inflammation. It impacts on thyroid function. It impacts on a lot of these sort of metabolic or physiological pathways. But equally, it really changes how people behave around food. It can really drive appetite up when you've got when you're eating to blood sugar, if you like. And I guess a really good example is that if people's energy is being propped up by their blood sugar, it means that they'll be hungry almost constantly, or they'll feel the need to eat almost constantly because their energy is tied intricately to their blood sugar. And so anytime their blood sugar dips, they start the craving and they start searching for foods that they need. They can't concentrate, they're ravenous, and all of these things. So it's going to change your food decisions. It's going to change all decision making. People are going to be super reactive. They're going to be angry or hangry, impacts on sleep. Like, there are just so many areas of well-being that blood sugar regulation impacts on, that it's definitely a prime thing I'm interested in.
If we pause on that, because your whole last sentence is quite revolutionary in how we view nutrition and its impact on our day-to-day vitality, energy, concentration. Let's just stop there and explore it, because I think that's maybe an aspect that a lot of people have been missing and thinking it's something else, when really you eat a certain food, your blood sugar goes up, it crashes, you go searching for fast food, you make wrong decisions, and then it's just a chronically rolling condition. Is that the telltale signs, all of those symptoms that you just gave? Or are you looking at continuous glucose monitors, blood sugar levels, and then you go back? So what are the indications that you think we've got a blood sugar regulation issue?
Yeah, great question. So part of the diet assessment, if you like, is figuring out sort of like calorie intake across a morning. And that's often a tell, actually. And so obviously when we're trying to be quote unquote good, often this actually equates to under eating. And not necessarily just under eating protein, but often it's under eating calories. And so if someone tells me that they're crashing at like 3-4 o'clock, and that's when they can't ignore the lolly jar in the office, then I'm thinking that's not a problem at 3 or 4 o'clock. That's actually a problem earlier that you need to solve. So that's one thing, is the sort of the diet assessment. Another tell is that you eat something and you feel sort of full at the time, and then you go along and you're fine, but then suddenly you're hungry, like within a second, and this ravenous hunger appears. Like, that's a real tell, because that's a blood sugar drop. That's not this physiological hunger which sort of grows over time. And if you were called into a meeting, you'd be able to go into the meeting, be able to conduct and sort of participate. You'd be hungry, but you'd be okay. Whereas if you can't think straight and all you can think of is food, and you find yourself getting really moody, then that's another tell for sort of blood sugar regulation. Really anxious people as well. Like I find that that's often sort of a blood sugar thing also. Like, if it's because I get just the increase in blood sugar, it increases that sort of excitatory glutamate in the brain, and often, and in fact, this is a little bit more, not complex, but it's a little bit more to it. So often with that blood sugar sort of crash, it's often a lack of protein as well. So you're not getting neurotransmitters in to help support the brain. So they sort of can go together. I am a fan of continuous glucose monitors, to your point. I don't think everyone needs them, but I think they can be really insightful. And I know that there are a lot of health professionals who are very vocal about thinking that they're not a good thing for generally healthy people. But the reality is that most people aren't actually that healthy. So if you can learn something about what a continuous glucose monitor tells you, about how food affects you and how sleep affects you and stress affects you in terms of your blood sugar regulation, then you can go such a long way into helping address it. So, but yeah, to your point, these are all things I think about.
How often would you see glucose dysregulation being an issue in your clientele?
I would say 80% of the time.
Yeah, which is kind of in line with the up-to-date literature, which is about 70% of the population.
Yeah.
I would see it quite commonly as well. So what are your first steps in identifying and putting steps in place to have a more flatlined blood sugar level across the day?
So I guess I sort of mentioned it just before when I talked about protein. Often it is people are under eating protein. Like, even people who think they're eating a lot of protein, like because they're having a smoothie in the morning and they're having chicken salad at lunch, and they're like, I'm having protein. But I mean, I know that you've spoken to Stu on your podcast already about protein requirements. They're definitely higher than that 0.8. And he's a fan of 1.6 grams per kg as a sort of not quite an upper limit. I know he mentioned that you could go a little bit higher. I tend to like to have really robust protein recommendations, not from a muscle protein synthesis perspective, but actually just from a brain perspective and an appetite regulation. Like if we are getting up to at least 30 to 40 grams in a meal, then that is just going to help buffer that blood sugar response to whatever else you're having alongside that protein. And when you look for opportunities for protein, you're just way less likely to have as many of those carbohydrate foods that may be impacting negatively on your blood sugar. So that's definitely something which I do. We also look at quality, like diet quality as well. So trying to have sources of carbs that people are eating that also contain fiber, might also have some micronutrients like vitamins, just to help boost the overall sort of diet quality. And I think as I understand it, and there's a great guy, you should talk to him, Marty Kendall. I'm a big fan of Marty and his work looking at satiety and looking at nutrient density. And I think that your brain goes searching for more than just protein in order to feel satisfied. Like there are other micronutrients, and I think potassium might be one of them. I'm going to say sodium, but actually that's just off the top of my head. I can't even remember the other ones, to be honest. But diet quality is key to me as well. And fiber, like I just mentioned it before with the carbohydrate foods, but the non-starchy carbohydrates as well. Because often people, like they have little meals and they're not actually getting a lot of fiber or volume in their meals. And so if they can boost up their meals with good non-starchy vegetables, that'll also slow down that blood sugar response. And making sure they're eating enough calories.
Yeah, so I know you're not a judgy person, but let's say you were very judgy when it came to people's foods.
Yeah.
And you looked at their plate and you would say, "Oh, I really think you should do this, this, and this."
Yeah.
What would some general recommendations be when someone's looking down at their plate, they've just served lunch or dinner, and it tries to hit everything you've just said, protein and fiber and micronutrients? Because it's a very confusing area. If you're not trained in nutrition, you hear, should I have fermented food and prebiotic and probiotic and fiber? And it gets very overwhelming. Yeah. Maybe give us some tips across breakfast, lunch, and dinner from looking down at your plate, trying to get a certain amount of these different types of foods.
Okay, so in the morning, if you have trained, then I'm going to want to have carbohydrate in your breakfast meal. And so but if you haven't trained, or you notice that you get a bit brain foggy in the morning and you have like toast or whatever, then maybe you're actually better off on a protein fat sort of based breakfast. So with that in mind, I would start with protein. And I'm a big fan of having those protein boluses a couple of times a day, like breakfast and dinner. Like I'm a fan of Don Layman and his work suggesting that if you can hit 30 to 40 grams of protein and more, like at that higher end, the older you are, because of the ability for the amino acids to get into the brain. It's a little bit less when you're older. So getting 40 grams of protein in, and it's not as hard as what people think either, Tony. And I'm not sure if now's a really good time to tell the listeners that I have a cookbook called 40 over 40, but it's like recipes with 40 grams of protein, which are relatively easy. But you're putting in your protein powder from a protein smoothie, you're having eggs with egg whites added, you're having, if you're vegan, you're having like tofu and maybe some protein powder, or you're having like dinner for breakfast, but you're getting a good robust amount of protein, so you've got those amino acids you need. But then also, as I mentioned before, if you have trained in the morning, it's a really great time to put your carbohydrate in, because your muscles are really receptive to taking carbs back in to be stored for glycogen at that point. So you might have rolled oats, you might have fruit, you might have toast, but you've got the protein alongside. They're sort of my top. Some people like rice. I'm not a big fan of that. That's fine. But then also you've got some good fats in there too. So the amount of fat might be determined by their goals and their sort of calorie requirements, if you like, because of course fat has the highest number of calories, but it does, alongside with protein, is really satisfying. So you might have some nuts, nut butter, mayo, whatever it is that you've got there. But if you're looking in a plate, you've got those sort of elements on your plate or in your smoothie and things like that, albeit, to your point, like you don't want to make some sort of huge calorie bomb without really knowing what's going in. So it can be really helpful to understand that and weigh out your food if you are so inclined.
I think by far and away, the protein which you have mentioned is the question I get from female clients. How much do you want me to eat? Where do you want me to find that source? How much is in one egg? Oh, there's no possible way I could get 40 grams for breakfast. But in reading Don Layman's work, where after the overnight fast, that's where you really want to drive up muscle anabolism with a big hit of protein. And yeah, I land firmly around that 30 to 40 grams of protein for breakfast to get that going. All those ideas are fantastic. Where can we find your cookbook?
So good. I'm glad I mentioned it. On my website, MikkiWilliden.com. We've got breakfast and we've got lunch, because of course you mentioned lunch as well. And the reality is, Tony, is I might be sitting here telling people what their plate should look like, but a good diet will not happen by accident. You actually have to plan the meals that you want to have across a week, and you have to prep some elements of them. And because of how I'm telling, how I'm sort of giving you advice as to how your meals might want to look, if that's wildly different from what you're currently doing, then you do need to put some thought into it. And it doesn't mean you have to overhaul your every single meal, but those couple of things of planning and prepping it's 90% of the work. So people often are like, how do I get that much in at lunch? And it's like, well, maybe the first thing you do is double the amount of protein you're currently having. Like, even if you're not even measuring it, but you suspect you're on the low side, why don't you just double that? But where I do see some people miss the mark a little bit, Tony, are sort of super active people, just sort of don't have any carbs in their lunch. And then they're like starving and they're not sure why, and they're sort of crashing a little bit. And I do think that appropriate sort of carbohydrate for active people, getting it in the forms that I'm sort of talking about, like fruit or rice, if that's quick to digest, or potato or sweet potato, I think that can be a really good element to lunch, particularly if you've been active across the morning. It just helps sort of satisfy across the afternoon.
And do you tend to go even with your protein distribution, or do you tend to go, like Don would say, most important is breakfast and dinner, and because once that pathway is on, then it tends to be on, so you want it book-ending your day? Or do you try and just realize that most people find it difficult to eat protein and just give an even recommendation of 40, 40, 40, and then chances are you're going to actually hit those numbers?
Yeah. Do you know, I tend to say breakfast and dinner, and then collect your protein for the rest of the day. Really. So if lunch is like a couple of eggs and maybe some cottage cheese, that might only be about 18 grams of protein. And then you're getting close to maybe 100 grams of protein there, but maybe you've got a protein shake after exercise, or something as a snack, which for active people, I think snacks are great and appropriate. And I'm probably talking to an active audience because it's your podcast. But for people who aren't as active, then snacking isn't as appropriate. So I might try to get them to have much more, to get most of their protein in at their meals instead.
And at lunch and dinner, are there any things on the plate or recommendations that you have that you think are often missed? I think when we talk about nutrition, most people realize if it's green, it must be magically good for us. So it's green everything. Yeah. But are there other foods or colors or types of food like legumes or fermented food, pickles? Are there other things that you think, well, the population just are not getting these? Either they just don't have different cultures' foods and they're pretty stock standard with their food. What else do you see is missing that you think we would really benefit from adding to the diet?
Well, we do know that as diverse a diet as possible will bring with it potentially diversity in nutrients. Eating seasonally is also good, or having frozen vegetables, because those vegetables are picked at their sort of key readiness, and so they're likely to provide those nutrients. So I do think, and I think volume is key as well, because often people skip on the veggies, to my point earlier, and then they're hungrier later and they're wondering why, but they just haven't got a particular volume of food. Because what we do know, and there is research to show, and this might be Barbara Rolls' work, is that people eat a volume of food rather than necessarily calories. And so if you can have a certain weight, then that's actually going to be satisfying regardless of whether you're eating 2,100 calories in that meal or 1,000 calories. So I think getting that volume in is often missed. To your point about legumes, like they're a great source of carbohydrate, they're just not as good a source of protein, which is what people often sort of eat them for. And they're a great source of fiber. But there are, of course, people who do not tolerate any vegetables or very few vegetables, like they have diarrhea because of all the raw greens they eat, or they get bloated from vegetables that contain FODMAPs or the legumes. So it's understanding how your body sort of tolerates that stuff is key. And the final thing I would say is a lot of like women, particularly of this age, who struggle with sleep, and a lot of women do, they are often also the women that don't put any carbohydrate in the evening meal. And we know that carbs help promote the production of serotonin, which is our feel-good hormone, that is then converted into melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And actually, I think carbs, if your body's in a really stressed state, they seem to calm the nervous system down. Is the only way I can describe it. So putting some carbs in to your evening meal can help promote that sort of restful sort of sleep state too. And that's often missed because of the no carbs after dark rule.
That's another legacy that really does deserve to die. And my experience is identical to yours in every client group that struggles with sleep. By adding carbohydrate to that evening meal has almost always solved that problem of either waking up with a hypoglycemic episode or being able to fall asleep well. And the logic is there because if you feed them a carb-rich lunch, they want to have a sleep while they're at their
100%.
desk. We just use that logic and we shift it to night. And it makes a world of difference. Now, you said something earlier before I wanted just to go back and visit, and that's intolerance to fiber. And there certainly is a growing awareness around FODMAPs and other types of fiber intolerance. How often do you see it, and how would you know whether this is you?
Yeah, so I see it pretty, I'd say maybe 50% of the time, but also people don't often tune into it themselves, and I think they're being bloated after a meal is normal, or having, and look, gas is normal, but like an overproduction of gas is not normal, bloating and cramps and things like that. So I might see it about 50% of the time. And so if someone comes to me and they say that this is how they're feeling, then, I mean, the first thing and the gold standard is an elimination diet. Like, people often come and ask me what tests they need to get to determine what they're experiencing here, like some sort of like GI map test, which I'm not saying is not valuable, but that's not the first thing you do. Like, the first thing you do is you do an elimination diet. You keep a food journal, you figure out, you take out a bunch of low-hanging fruit when it comes to these digestive issues. And then after a period of time where the gut settles and the potential damage that might be done to your small intestine, sort of villi, I always get that name wrong, but once that sort of has settled down, and other practitioners would suggest it might be 28 days, then you reintroduce quite rigorously a particular food to assess how your body is sort of like responding to it. Because if you are in the throes of having these digestive issues, almost anything can set it off. But the reality is that for most people, it might just be 3 to 5 foods or 1 to 2 things, but in that inflamed state, like their stomach's not going to be that happy. So that is sort of the path we take. And in addition to obviously the elimination approach, because you need to do more than just take it out. I'm not a naturopath, but I've learned a lot from my naturopathic friends over the years. And they're a big fan of putting some supplements in that may help support the gut, like glutamine is an amino acid, like MSM powder to help reduce inflammation, like collagen is another one. Bone broth has been used forever. So I'm going to suggest that we also just have not 1,000 supplements, because you can overwhelm people, but a few sort of key gut supplements at the same time. So your gut is in a good environment to help sort of support that healing. Notwithstanding that if this person also has a low protein intake, actually just getting those amino acids in, which are the sort of foundation of our musculoskeletal system, is also going to help with their gut health too.
I see this in females of a number of different age groups, whether they are in their 20s and obsessed about looking a certain way and chronically on a diet, but also peri and post menopause, where there's all sorts of life stresses and uncertainty going on. But it seems that whole systemic inflammation, that whole stress, then affects the ability to tolerate fiber, full stop, and not just FODMAPs. And that bloating and gas produced after a meal suddenly appears from nowhere, but is very much strongly attached to life stress.
Yeah.
Did you find the same thing?
100%. 100%. And
Are there any supplements that you think, you've mentioned some for the IBS-like symptoms, but are there any supplements that you think most people would benefit from this versus not taking them?
yeah, there are. And what I will just say before we move on to the supplements is stress is a huge one. And it is huge for so many reasons because stress management forces an individual to consider the environment that they work in, the things going on in their house, everything that's going on. And to put stress management tactics in place seems like yet another thing to do. But from a digestion perspective, it is one of the best things to do. So I'll just want to say that because digestion really starts in the brain, not necessarily the stomach. So, and there are loads of things you can do to help in that regard. From a supplement perspective, vitamin D for most people. Of course, get your levels checked, but particularly in winter, vitamin D, along with K2, because that helps activate enzymes that allow vitamin D to drive calcium into the bones, which is one of its important role. Fish oil, because almost no one is eating enough of the sort of fresh fatty fish or even canned sardines and salmon to get the DHA and EPA, and it's so important for inflammation. I think magnesium is really great. Helps with the central nervous system. It's involved in like 250 pathways in the body. It helps with GABA production in the brain. So those three, absolutely. And it is really hard to get everything you need from your diet, actually. And you will hear people go on TV and say, you can get everything you need from your diet. And I'm like, really? No, you can't. Like, you cannot. Anyone just needs to dive a little bit into the literature to see this. And so a lot of people could probably do with a really good multivitamin, particularly if you're in a calorie deficit. But I would not necessarily say to someone, do this. I would probably say to them, let's get your nutrients measured. Let's really do some targeted stuff. But those three there must be more, but those three there are definitely. And I do love creatine, of course, but not everyone can tolerate it.
All of the things that you mentioned there, and they're not the common things that you can walk down a supermarket and grab. There's vitamin C and vitamin B and vitamin A. It really is the bigger picture, and that is exactly the same as my experience as well. Only a handful of the clients in my world would have enough fatty fish, so omega-3. Magnesium, without doubt, would be the big things. As you can tell by my tan, I'm an advocate of sensible sun exposure. But you're right, there's many who either for their skin care or have been warned to never go in the sun, ever, under any circumstance. And they come back with unmeasurable vitamin D.
Yeah.
And these things require a conversation.
100% agree.
What is the time frame that you give for last meal before you go to bed to really get the most out of the carbohydrates to help you sleep, but to also not be digesting food and then going to bed with a full stomach?
Do you know, Tony, I find it so individual, isn't it? Like, I have clients who feel their best when they have their dinner by 5 o'clock. And I have clients who literally want to eat at 8:30 and go to bed at 9. And that's what suits them. And this is where I feel that any of the, like, I hear it a lot actually, like you shouldn't eat 3 hours before bed and things like that because of metabolic health or other reasons, or to your point, what you can digest. And I think someone's going to know themselves. If they don't sleep well after a heavy meal, then I'm going to need to push that back. But so I don't really have a recommendation if I'm not talking to an individual in front of me. But what I will say is that the most important thing is sort of what you're eating and how much you're eating. It's far more important than when you're eating it for the most part, albeit bookend your days with protein.
Yeah, and I find the only kind of caveat to that is how hot you're feeling. And I think the larger the individual, either more muscle mass or more fat mass, if you're eating closer to bed or larger amount, you'll go to bed and you'll feel hot. Yeah. And that heat then usually prevents that dropping into deep sleep. But the smaller the individual, or most of the females that I work with, really, as you've said to your point, could eat at 8:30 and go to bed at 9, and they're not hot and there's no problems falling asleep. So I think that's one that helps me make that kind of decision.
Yeah, nice. And I just get people to check in with themselves. I think so often they rely on data, on social media experts, on all of these things, and they sort of outsource the most important information, which is how they feel. So that's always going to sort of be my first question to them.
Well, I want to thank you for being the person that I always send people to. And when I have a question, I just message you to get the answer. But you offer a great service to the community, your podcast, your courses that you run, the information you put on social media. You're a voice of reason, whereas this is a space where there's a lot of sharks, there's people selling very unique products, and the information is often not evidence-based and can be dubious. But I really consider you as somebody putting out good, mainstream, usable, based in practice, easily to digest information. I just have your details, so I message you. But where can everyone get access to you?
Amazing, Tony. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat. Like, I love these conversations. It's just like just chatting with another friend about all the things that we'd discuss over coffee. So you can find me over on MikkiWilliden.com is my website. But of course, I'm most active on Instagram at Mikki Williden, just my name. And then the Mikkipedia podcast, where you can find all of your favorite podcasts.
I enjoy listening. You're a weekly podcaster, so I don't know how you fit everything into your life.
Neither do I. But I do it because I love it, as you do, I'm sure.
Yeah, the passion is clear. Mikki, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks so much, Tony. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning into the Stronger with Time podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who would benefit from hearing this. And if you're ready to go deeper, the 9-week Science of Thriving course is available now. The link is in the show notes.